Welcome to the Physician's Guide to Financial Wellness, the podcast dedicated to helping physicians in Michigan turn their professional success into financial success while enjoying life along the way. And now, here are your hosts, Andrew Mushbaugh and Trent DeBruin.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Physician's Guide to Financial Wellness. This is Trent DeBruin, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Andrew Mushbaugh. And today we're going to talk about a question or situation we come across fairly often, which is that someone has a larger lump sum of cash they're looking to invest, and they aren't sure whether they should invest it all at once or if they should do it in a gradual manner. It can be easy to get hung up on this decision, especially if you don't fully understand the pros and cons of each approach and how they apply to your situation. And the uncertainty can become enough of a roadblock that it leads to inaction and that money just sitting there or even continuing to pile up as you save more. So today we're going to share some perspective for how to think through the decision and which approach is right for you.
So is this going to be the first episode where we give a market time prediction?
Why? Have you been sitting on a pile of cash waiting until this episode was released?
Fortunately, I wasn't holding my breath, but appreciate you answering my question with a question.
Well, just saying no felt a bit too short.
Fair enough.
So why don't you kick things off by providing everyone with an overview?
Sure. So as Trent mentioned, this can be a common situation where you end up with a lump sum of cash, or using the very technical term, a pile of cash, that you're looking to do something quote unquote better with. Perhaps it came from selling a home, receiving an inheritance or life insurance proceeds from a parent, or just having built up cash in your checking or savings account because you weren't sure what to do with it. But regardless of how the money gets there, the situation is the same, at least assuming you'd like to find a better alternative than leaving the money in cash. So you're faced with a decision of the best route moving forward with how to put that cash to better use. And stepping back, before making the decision to invest a portion of the cash you've accumulated, you'll want to first revisit your overall financial plan to look at the potential areas or use for that cash. For example, if you inherited a large sum of money, would you want to pay down student loans, pay off the mortgage, use a portion for a vacation, or just do whatever is financially optimal? So understanding your overall financial plan is almost always the first step. But for the purpose of our discussion today, we'll assume you are past that point and have decided you'd like to invest a larger sum of cash and want to understand the best way to invest it. Looking at it from this perspective helps to narrow the focus and break down the question. However, before settling on the right approach for you, investing in one lump sum or gradually over a set period of time, you'll want to understand several other factors like your investment goals, the time horizon for needing the money you're investing for, and a reality check of your emotions around investing. As we've talked about in prior episodes on investing, knowing what you're investing for is step one, because that determines the time horizon for your investment, which helps back into the right investment allocation, i.e. your mix of stocks and bonds and other investments. The reason for this is because you're going to invest differently depending on the time horizon. For example, if you're 60 years old and investing for the duration of a 30-plus year retirement, that's going to look different than if you're 43 years old and investing for college costs in 10 years. But assuming you've gone through that process and figured out the right investment allocation for your situation, you can then move on to this next step of implementing it. And as Trent alluded to, at the most basic level, there are essentially two options when investing available cash on hand. You can either do it all at once, or you can do it in some type of gradual manner where you invest a certain amount of money over a certain time period until all of the cash has ultimately been invested. Now, there are certainly nuances and options with the second approach, where you have flexibility in determining exactly what that gradual process will look like, which we'll touch on. But that's a general overview of the question we'll be walking through. So Trent, why don't you walk through the first option of investing everything all at once as a lump sum?
Yeah, this is definitely the most simple and straightforward approach, where you simply take the money that's available and go ahead and invest it all at once. And there are definitely several advantages of doing it this way. One of them, as mentioned, is the simplicity of it. Rather than having to spend time thinking about what time horizon you'll invest the money over or how much you'll invest during each period, you're able to take care of it all at once. This also saves the additional follow-up work and logistics of having to then implement whatever gradual investment approach you would have otherwise used. Because if you do opt for the gradual approach, that will involve then keeping track of the time to invest each subsequent chunk of money, as well as the effort required to actually go into your investment account and make the actual trades to invest the money. So simplicity is the first obvious advantage, but it's not the only one. From a numerical or financial perspective, on average, this is also the optimal approach. The reason why is that, on average, the stock market goes up more often than it goes down, and because of that, the best time to invest money is as soon as it's available. Now, this has historically been the case, and it's not to say that during certain periods throughout the history of the stock market, it didn't work out particularly well, but looking at the full history of the past 100 years, it's been true. Just to provide some numbers and context around this, if you look at the S&P 500, which is essentially a proxy for the overall U.S. stock market, during the 90-year period from 1926 until 2016, you would see that the stock market had a positive return during 75% of the one-year periods. So looking at any given one-year time period during those 9 decades, if you were invested in the stock market, you would have earned a positive return during 75% of them, and you would have had a negative return during only 25% of them. And as you expand the time period beyond just 1 year, the odds of realizing a positive return by investing in stocks stack even more and more in your favor. So looking at the 5-year time periods between 1926 and 2016, you would have had a positive investment return in 87% of them. For the 10-year time periods, this number jumps up to 95%, and for the 15-year time periods, it moves all the way up to 99%. And this illustrates a point we've discussed on the podcast many times in the past, and it's the idea that the longer your time horizon, the more ability you have to weather the shorter-term ups and downs of the stock market while capturing the higher expected returns of investing in stocks, which is why you want to match your investment allocation, your mix of stocks and bonds, with the time horizon for the goal you're investing for, and know that a longer time horizon provides more ability to take on risk. Bringing it back to the discussion of whether to invest cash all at once or in a gradual manner, if your investment time horizon is 10, 20, or 30 years, and you know you won't need the money anytime soon, the case for investing it all at once is even stronger, since it doesn't matter as much if you have bad timing and happen to invest immediately before a stock market correction or bear market, because odds are by the time you actually need the money down the road, the market will have had time to recover, and your investments will be worth more than what you paid for them. Another reason why the math works in favor of investing a lump sum of cash all at once is due to the nature of timing and how much missing even a handful of strong days for the stock market can negatively impact your long-term investment return. There was a study done that looked at the S&P 500 from the period of 1990 to 2017 that really exemplifies this timing dynamic and gives some perspective around it. The study first looked at the overall return of investing in the S&P 500 during that time period, then looked at how that return changed by missing some of the best days. So assuming you invested $1,000 at the beginning in 1990 and left that money invested all the way through until 2017, your $1,000 would have grown to $13,739, which equates to an annual return of around 10%, so similar to the historical average. However, let's say you were trying to time the market, and by doing so, you happen to miss the best single-day return for the stock market during that time period. Well, missing just that one day would result in your money only growing to $12,313 at the end of the time period, or 10% lower than it would have if you remained invested. Taking it one step further, if you would have missed the 5 best days for the market, you would have ended up with $9,114, or 34% less than you otherwise would have. And if we assume you missed the best 15 days for the market, so the best 15 days out of the roughly 4,300 days the market was open during those 17 years, while your $1,000 investment would have only grown to $5,365. So you would have ended up with more than 60% less than the $13,739 that someone who remained invested during this entire time period would have ended up with. And this is just looking at investing $1,000 initially. So think about it if we're instead talking about investing hundreds of thousands of dollars in your retirement accounts. If you instead assume that you invested $500,000 initially and missed those 15 best days, you would have ended up with more than $4 million less than the person who didn't miss those days and was invested during the entire period. It's almost hard to even wrap your head around what a dramatic impact only a handful of days can have, and it illustrates the dangers or potential pitfalls around trying to time the market, which the evidence shows essentially nobody can do consistently. Now, it is worth noting that while this is the situation on average, it's certainly possible that an individual situation might be different. You might choose to wait to invest your lump sum of cash, and the market might then go down 20% or 30% over the coming weeks or months, at which time you then decide to invest. Although, as we'll talk about next, it's easier in theory than it is in reality to actually invest after a market decline. Well, if this was the case, you would obviously end up doing much better than the person who invested their money immediately before the stock market decline. So that's not to say that investing cash all at once as a lump sum will always work better, or that the historical stock market trends and dynamics we discuss will continue going forward. But from a purely financial perspective, based on the math of probabilities and historical trends, that's been the financially optimal approach over time. However, as we've discussed many times in prior episodes, when it comes to financial planning, people aren't robots and there are emotions involved. So it's all about balancing the financially optimal approach with the qualitative considerations, which is where a gradual approach can work well.
Yeah, exactly. It'd be a lot easier without emotions. Just like it'd be a lot easier to watch a Michigan football game without emotions. But I won't go down that wormhole. So while the numbers show that, on average, investing cash as a lump sum has been the best approach and easiest to implement, there are certainly some potential downsides. For example, regardless of if it's rational or not, it just feels different for most people to invest $500,000 versus $5,000. which can magnify some of the emotions we feel with investing. So knowing it often feels different when you invest a larger dollar amount, you're faced with the stress, or reality, that you may have bad timing with your initial investment. You invest $500,000 and the stock market goes down 10% the next week. And because of this fear, or potential fear, it can make it difficult to actually pull the trigger and invest everything at once. So if you aren't going to invest everything all at once, the alternative is some type of gradual approach, where rather than investing it in one lump sum, you break it into smaller amounts and invest those bit by bit until all the money is ultimately invested. For example, if you have $100,000 to invest, maybe you decide to invest $25,000 now, then another $25,000 each month over the next 3 months until it's all invested. This general approach is known as dollar cost averaging, and there are countless different ways to do it, but it's the idea of following a set or disciplined schedule that ensures you are at least investing a portion of your cash over time. There are several benefits to dollar cost averaging, but the biggest benefit is simply to help control your emotions and take action. If you have a large amount of cash that's been sitting on the sidelines, especially if you've been watching the market continue to go up, it can be a bit daunting or intimidating to suddenly pull the trigger and jump into the market with the entire amount. It's one thing to rationally understand the numbers and the probabilities about what's the best approach, but it's another thing to emotionally feel comfortable with it. Dollar cost averaging can make the process more manageable and less stressful, since it doesn't feel like that big of a decision or action, since you're only committing to invest a portion initially, then the rest in a set schedule where you have a plan in place. And this can help relieve some of the concerns about having bad timing with your initial investment. Another benefit of dollar cost averaging is that if you happen to be investing during a period where the stock market is either declining or is fluctuating up and down from a month-to-month basis, but remaining flat overall, you'll be better off financially. The first scenario is obvious. If the stock market is declining, you'd be better off investing the money over several months relative to if you invested everything at once. In other words, by spreading out your investments when the market is declining, you're able to buy more at a lower average price. The second scenario of a fluctuating market isn't quite as obvious, so it's helpful to illustrate this with some simple math. So let's say that you have $100 to invest, and you imagine the stock market is an individual stock with an initial price per share of $10. If you invest your $100 all at once at a price per share of $10, you'll own 10 shares with an average price per share of $10. If the price of the stock market then goes down to $5 the next month, then back up to $10 the month after that, you still own 10 shares at an average price of $10 per share, since that's where you initially bought it. If, however, you decide that rather than investing your full $100 at the beginning, you'll invest 1/3 initially, a third the following month, and the final third the month after, you would end up owning over 13 shares of the stock market with an average price per share of $7.50. So you'd be better off with your 13 shares than the person investing the lump sum who has only 10 shares. The reason why is that if you're dollar cost averaging and are investing the same dollar amount of money over a set time period, if the stock market declines, you're able to buy more shares of it because the price per share has gone down. Another benefit of dollar cost averaging is that you have the flexibility to adjust or accelerate your schedule if there's an opportunity. While you always want to have a specific plan at the start of the process, you can make changes depending on what the market does. So let's say you're concerned about the potential for a near-term stock market decline. So you decide that rather than investing your lump sum of cash all at once, you'll do it in equal parts over the next 6 months to ease into the market. Well, if you're 3 months into the process and that pullback you were worried about materializes and the stock market declines by 20%, you can decide that rather than waiting to invest the remaining money over the final 3 months, you'll go ahead and invest it all at once now because that risk that you're concerned about has already played out. Now, it's worth noting that it's much easier to look at the situation from the outside and think that's how we would act, but it's another thing to actually follow through with it. The reality is that, at least for most people, when the stock market is declining, rather than viewing it as a great opportunity to buy more at a better price, more often than not, there's instead concern about whether it will continue to decline and how much further it will go. For example, if it's already fallen 20%, who's to say it won't fall another 20%? So due to the emotions involved with investing, it can be difficult to actually adjust your dollar cost averaging approach and take advantage if there is a stock market pullback, but it is an option for those who have the temperament to implement it. If you realize you may have a hard time in the moment, another option to further remove the emotion is to explicitly bake it into your plan on the front end. For example, perhaps you decide that you'll invest your money in equal parts over the next 6 months, but also include a rule that if the stock market is X% lower at any point during that period, for example, 10%, 20%, etc., you'll double the amount of money you're investing each month, and in that sense, mechanically accelerate the process based on preset rules. This can be helpful for having the best of both worlds, where you maintain the ability to capitalize if there's a pullback, but you're also able to remove the guesswork and emotions.
Yeah, that's a great segue into the final point we want to discuss, which is just the importance of having a plan when it comes to this decision and process. Having a plan is something we always advocate for your finances in general, and it's certainly true when it comes to investing a lump sum of cash that's been on the sidelines. And as Andrew just alluded to, the reason why having a plan is so important is because when it comes to money and investing, whether we like it or not, emotions tend to play a big role, and that role often consists of getting in the way of what we should be doing. So whenever possible, it's best to remove emotion to the extent you can from the process, which makes it more likely that you'll be able to do the quote-unquote right thing. And we have an entire podcast episode dedicated to this topic, episode number 30, How to Manage the Emotions of Investing. So we won't go into too much detail here, but two specific things to mention are the cycle of greed and fear and the asymmetry of gains and losses. With greed and fear, the way it works is that when the stock market's going up, people tend to feel good and are more inclined to believe that it's a good time to invest money, whereas when the market's declining, fear and negative emotions tend to kick in and people are often more worried about investing in a falling market, which, when you think about it, is the opposite of how investing actually works, where your future investment return is a function of the price at which you initially bought the investment. So your expected future return is going to be better if you buy after the market's gone down rather than if you buy after the market's gone up. However, while it's easier to conceptualize this from a rational perspective, it's unlikely that you'll feel that way from an emotional perspective while the market is declining, and unlikely that you'll be increasingly excited about investing money as it falls. Another relevant behavioral factor at play is the asymmetry of gains and losses, or the fact that humans tend to dislike losses more than we enjoy gains, often by a factor of 2 to 1 or more. So in theory, while we should feel equally good and bad when our investment either goes up by 50% or falls by 50%, in reality, we feel much worse when it falls than we feel good when it rises. This applies to the decision of investing a lump sum of cash because there's often that fear of having bad timing and investing immediately before the next stock market pullback. And we know we'll feel much worse if that were to happen than we would feel good if we invested immediately before a 20% rise in the market. So this asymmetry is another behavioral element that can lead to inaction. Knowing that our emotions and behavioral biases are not our friend and are only likely to stand in the way of doing the right things, it's always best to sideline them by having a plan where you have a clear playbook to follow regardless of what's happening. As mentioned earlier, the exact form that plan takes can be different for everyone, but at the very least, there should be a clearly defined, predetermined set of actions that you'll take to get from point A, having a lump sum of cash that needs to be invested, to point B, having that money invested. There can be decision rules to provide an element of flexibility and adaptability, but there needs to be a plan in place. By doing this, your default state effectively moves from one of inaction, or the status quo, to one of action, where a plan is being followed and conscious effort is required to move away from it. So that's a bit more on the behavioral side of things and why they make having a plan so important. Well, hopefully our discussion today was helpful for giving you a sense of how to approach this question of how to invest a lump sum of money. As you can see, there are different options, and it's about weighing both the qualitative and quantitative factors to figure out which is right for you. And just to give a quick recap of some of the key points, number one, when looking to invest a lump sum of cash, there are two basic ways to do it, either all at once or gradually, and each has its own pros and cons. Number two of the main benefits of investing all at once are that it's the easiest logistically, and historically it's been the financially optimal approach, since the stock market has gone up more often than it's gone down, so the best time to invest has been as soon as cash becomes available. On the flip side, the drawbacks of this approach include the risk of having bad timing, where you invest immediately before a stock market pullback or a bear market, and the mental and emotional considerations, where it might not feel good to do it this way and can be difficult to actually take action because of the timing risk. Number three, if you don't invest all at once, the other option is to follow some type of gradual approach of investing the money bit by bit until it's all invested, which is known as dollar cost averaging. The main downside of dollar cost averaging are that it's more difficult to implement logistically, so there's more work involved, and historically it hasn't been the financially optimal approach. However, the key positives are that it often tends to be easier and feel better from a mental and emotional perspective, and if you happen to invest during a period where the stock market is either declining or is fluctuating upward and downward, but generally trending sideways, you'll end up doing better financially than the all-at-once approach. And lastly, number four, one of the most important things is to have a plan, regardless of the exact form that plan takes. The reason why having a plan is so important is that it helps you remove the emotion, guesswork, and behavioral bias from the process, and therefore makes it more likely that you'll be able to avoid getting in your own way. Well, thank you as always to everyone for joining us for another episode of the show. You can find the show notes at the podcast page of our website, mdwmllc.com/podcast. And if you have thoughts to share or questions you'd like to have answered, feel free to shoot us an email at info@mdwmllc.com. Take care, everyone, and we'll look forward to talking to you again soon.
Want even more ideas, tools, and resources on how to make smart financial decisions? Check out the resources section of MD Wealth Management's website at mdwmllc.com. where you'll find additional knowledge and insight from Michigan physicians, including a blog, ebook, and one-page guides. While there, you can also schedule a 15-minute conversation with Andrew and Trent to learn more about what it means to work with the firm and how they serve physicians. If you've enjoyed the content, please leave a review on iTunes and share with your friends and colleagues. Thanks so much for listening. Andrew Mushbaugh and Trent DeBruin are certified financial planners, principals, and co-founders of MD Wealth Management, a registered investment advisory firm in the state of Michigan. All opinions shared in the show are for general information and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and no guarantee of future returns. Please consult with your legal advisor, your tax advisor, or your financial advisor before making any decisions.